Okay, so we've talked about the history of the Constitution and about some of the issues that had to be negotiated at the convention in Philadelphia in 1787. Let's now take a look at the Constitution itself and how it is organized and what kind of a governing system it creates. There are 7 articles in the Constitution. Just laid them out here. I want to just flip through it real fast. This is the version that's in your textbook. Here's the preamble. Beautiful little summary. And we start with, there's Article 1. Article 1 is about the legislative branch. Here's all legislative powers, blah, blah, blah. Section 2 is the House of Representatives, bicameral, right? So there's the House. And the Senate is discussed in Section 3. Section 4 and 5 are sort of housekeeping. Section 6 as well, sort of, do they get paid? How often do they have to meet? Keeping records and things like that. Section 7 is pretty important. This is where the lawmaking process is spelled out. Section 8, a list of powers. 9, things they're not supposed to do. 10, states. And then we are to Article 2, which is the executive branch. You can see it's not nearly as long as Article 1, which is itself not very long. This is elections, Section 2, powers, and 3, sort of, again, powers, and also the State of the Union. And impeachment, Section 4. The impeachment process is spelled out in Article 1 itself. Now we're to Article 3, which is even shorter. It's about the judicial branch, the kinds of cases that the Supreme Court gets to hear. It says that there is going to be a Supreme Court. Doesn't say how many judges. The kinds of cases they get to hear. And here's Article 4. Article 4 is sort of about the states and the federal government and how they relate to one another. And Article 5, very short paragraph here about amending the Constitution. Article 6 is a kind of a catch-all section. Most important thing here is the Supremacy Clause. Shall be the supreme law of the land. Now we will come back and talk about this later. And 7 is not relevant anymore. This is the process for ratification. So it's not a very long document. And let me just take you very quickly. Here are the amendments. 27 amendments, which I'll be talking about here in a bit. 27 amendments, not very many, not very long. All right. The California Constitution, in contrast, is quite a long document. Sorry, here we go. 35 articles. You can find it here at this state government website. 35 articles, starting with Declaration of Rights and voting. And you'll see the different branches here as well, legislative, executive, judicial. But there are also a lot of policy issues that are spelled out here in the California Constitution. It's quite a bit different than the U.S. Constitution, which is pretty much just about the process. We don't have policy issues mostly that are hashed out in the Constitution itself. We do that through regular legislation. But a lot of this is, much more detailed policy decisions. And there are over 500 amendments to the California Constitution. Now, this is mostly because it's just so much easier to amend the California Constitution than it is to amend the U.S. Constitution, which is quite difficult. So they end up being different kinds of documents because the process is so different. All right, so the Constitution itself, though, the U.S. Constitution, we can look at the parts, certainly, but that doesn't tell you what is it actually doing? What kind of a system is it creating? And there are different ways that one could talk about this. I like to discuss it in terms of 8 different elements in the system. It's a little bit different than the way the textbook discusses it. But one way that we can think about this is that the Constitution gives certain kinds of powers. And the most important grants of powers it gives is to the federal government, which was not really very powerful before this. It also denies powers. It sets up a separation of power system. It creates a balance between federal and state power. It discusses elections. Judicial review is a part of our system. And civil liberties and equality. All right, so I'm going to talk about each of those in turn and find these pieces in the Constitution where these things happen. And we'll take a look at it. All right, so Article 1, first off, grants of power, some examples. Okay, so each one of these is going to be some examples I'm giving you. This is not a comprehensive list, it doesn't cover everything, just to give you a sense. Okay, so we're in Article 1, and I told you that there was a list of powers in Section 8, and that is where you'll find these grants of power. Very important to understand. Article 1, Section 8, the Congress shall have power. And then you see a list of 2, all these grants of power. Now, it's a fairly long list. The ones I want you to pay closest attention to are the first one, the power to lay and collect taxes. It's not a mistake, I think, or an accident that this is the first power listed here. This is one of the biggest deficiencies in the Articles of Confederation system. We also want to pay attention to the third one here, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. This has turned out to be one of the most important parts in the Constitution. We call it the Commerce Clause. And it gives the federal government the ability to regulate commerce among the several states. And a lot of powers have emerged because of that clause. And our meaning of that clause, our understanding of that clause, has also changed over time. And I'll talk about that when I talk about federalism in the next section. We also see here the power to declare war is a power of Congress, right? This is a power of the legislative branch. It's not a power of the president. And the last one I want to point out, all of these are very important, but I just want to also point out this very last one, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. What this does essentially is extends the powers of the Congress beyond the things that are specifically listed here. And sometimes we call this the elastic clause because it stretches the powers that are listed here. And I'll talk about that more later as well. I don't know why doesn't this say necessary and proper? It should.